Hi, my name is Jaclyne Garcia. I'm a senior in the Lemelson Honors Program at UCLA. Over the past 2 years, I had the opportunity to study Filipino Americans living in Hawaii and how food-related cultural projects can aid in the process of decolonization for historically colonized peoples. Through my research, I discovered that the legacies of colonization have not only influenced Filipino foodways throughout history, but they've also impacted present-day Filipino Americans and their relationship with Filipino food in ways that we can't see with the naked eye. Most people have positive associations with the foodways of their culture. Foodways are beliefs and practices around food that are usually culturally or ethnically specific and passed down between generations. Foodways provide connection to family and community and can be a huge part of how we reinforce our identity. For many second-generation immigrants, eating and preparing the foods that their parents ate back in their homeland can create a sense of connection to that place and their culture, even growing up in the United States. But sometimes, external forces, like media representation, social interactions, and family socialization, can create feelings of embarrassment or self-consciousness around the foods of our family and culture. I discovered this when studying Filipino Americans involved with Filipino Food Week, an annual event dedicated to promoting and celebrating Filipino food in Hawaii. During the first event in 2019, locals gathered in restaurants across Oahu and Maui to learn more about Filipino cuisine while sharing dishes featuring coconut, a staple ingredient in Filipino cooking. In 2020, the event pivoted to an online format due to COVID-19 and focused more on developing their presence on social media. Organizers uploaded educational videos on Filipino history, values, and food. Filipino chefs and home cooks across Hawaii uploaded their own videos where they shared personal stories and family recipes. I analyzed social media posts and news footage to understand why the event was created and its impact on Hawaii's Filipino community. I also conducted qualitative interviews over Zoom with organizers and participants to dive deeper into the importance of Filipino Food Week and individuals' relationships with Filipino foodways. One story I heard was shared by Diana, a second-generation Filipino American who lives in Hawaii with her husband. Before moving to Hawaii, Diana spent her childhood in a predominantly white neighborhood in New York. Eating her parents' cooking became a way for her to connect to her Filipino heritage. One of her favorite dishes was chicken afritada, a hearty chicken and vegetable stew with a rich soy sauce and tomato broth. One day, Diana brought chicken afritada to school and was teased by one of her classmates. For a long time after, Diana had difficulty reconciling the love she had for Filipino food and the desire to share it with others. But Diana wasn't alone in this. Many of the Filipino chefs who participated shared similar experiences, citing things like the negative portrayal of Filipino food in American media. One example is the portrayal of balut, a popular street food in the Philippines. Balut is a fertilized duck embryo, typically seasoned with vinegar, soy sauce, or salt. On shows like Fear Factor and social media platforms like YouTube, balut has been exoticized as something strange and disgusting. Like Diana, seeing these types of reactions to balut made these chefs hesitant about sharing Filipino food with non-Filipinos. The feelings that each of them experienced can be captured in one word: shame. While feelings like embarrassment can be described as mild discomfort or awkwardness over something we did or said, shame goes much deeper than that. Shame is about who we are. This led me to ask the question, what is the root of this shame around Filipino food and identity? The answer is what is known as the colonial mentality. The colonial mentality is a subconscious belief among many Filipino Americans that Filipino culture is inferior, which was a result of over 400 years of colonial domination of the Philippines by Spain and the United States. Today, many Filipino Americans struggle with feeling pride toward their Filipino identity as a result of the colonial mentality. In my research, I noticed the colonial mentality operates through two main processes: the colonial gaze and colonial narratives. Both Diana and the participating chefs internalized a colonial gaze, a form of double consciousness where they look at their foodways from the perspective of the colonizer. For example, many of the second-generation chefs weren't taught Filipino language by their parents in order to assimilate within American society. Food became a consolatory means to connect with their Filipino culture, but after seeing how balut was portrayed in American media, the chefs also saw Filipino foodways as disgusting and inedible, and began to feel shame around their foodways and identity. As a result of this shame, they distanced themselves from their Filipino culture, like their parents did. Historically, the feelings of shame associated with the colonial mentality were imposed on indigenous Filipinos through the power of narrative. Narratives are widely held beliefs within a given context. Under certain social or historical conditions, like colonialism, narratives are constructed by those in power to serve a particular agenda. For example, kamayan is an indigenous way of eating using one's hands. It also represents a communal style of eating, where food is spread along banana leaves and shared among family and friends. To many Filipinos, kamayan demonstrates their shared values of generosity and community. During the early 1900s, American imperialists constructed their own colonial narrative around kamayan, labeling it as dirty and primitive. This justified their goal to civilize Filipinos by teaching them American dining etiquette, like eating with a fork and spoon. Similarly, the disgust surrounding balut in American media today mirrors the colonial narratives about the inferiority of Filipino culture witnessed during this period of American imperialism. Using critical discourse analysis, a method that studies how dialogues reflect struggles for power between dominant and minority groups, I uncovered even more narratives around Filipino cuisine and in contemporary American media. Things like, Filipino food is disgusting. Filipino food is invisible. Filipino food is unappreciated. Unlike colonial narratives around balut or kamayan, these narratives weren't constructed by an elite group to further a particular agenda. They are beliefs shared by Filipino Americans themselves as a result of the colonial mentality. Through this lens, what many Filipino Americans were expressing was actually, I am disgusting. I am invisible. I am unappreciated. While food was at the heart of this issue, it also became part of the solution. As I studied Filipino Food Week, I discovered that participants were also challenging the colonial mentality through a process known as decolonization. Decolonization is a process undertaken by historically colonized people where they identify attitudes of inferiority as a consequence of colonialism and work towards visibility and empowerment for their community. Recipe for decolonization. Ingredients: counter-narrative, a narrative that disputes dominant narratives created and shared by those in power. Agency, when a person or group intentionally pursues a goal as a way of challenging an existing power imbalance. Steps. Step 1. Tell your story. Diana's painful childhood experience made her hesitant to share Filipino food with others, but this changed when she met her husband Brian. He not only enjoys Filipino food, but regularly travels to the Philippines and eats it with her friends and family. For Filipino Food Week, the two of them shared a recipe they collaborated on together for kare-kare, an oxtail stew and a creamy peanut broth. By telling her story and transforming her negative associations around sharing Filipino food into positive ones, Diana created her own counter-narrative, that Filipino food is worth being shared. Sharing one story can create a chain reaction by encouraging others to do the same. Step 2. Embrace pre-colonial foodways. Engaging in things like kamayan can be an act of resistance against colonial narratives that demeaned this indigenous practice. Before the first Filipino Food Week was held in 2019, a local Filipino restaurant organized a kamayan feast to promote the event. By taking kamayan public, they proudly promoted and made visible pre-colonial foodways. Step 3. Create community. Filipino Food Week connected Filipinos across Hawaii and empowered them to share their experiences around Filipino food. It provided a space, both in person and online, to make sense of their past experiences. More importantly, Filipino Food Week created a community where they can reclaim and celebrate their Filipino identity. It is my hope that this research illuminates the experiences of Filipino Americans and other historically colonized groups, along with their complicated connection to their cultural traditions and identity. Through the power of food, they can free themselves from the colonial mentality and proudly embrace who they are.